Well, hello. I hope you had a good week. Today, I thought I would go over just what happened a couple months prior to my life-changing mystical experience, and and also illustrate how this ties in with Dr. Hugh Lin, whom we've been talking about, with the Hawaiian method for problem solving and healing. Because just to refresh your memory, he's the psychologist who worked with the criminally insane, but never directly. He only looked at their charts, and he did the Ho'oponopono process and cleared himself of the repressed, the unconscious memories that were probably in some way shared with those who were criminally insane. So this would happen for me that cleared the way for me to have that, the grace of that experience of the Holy Spirit, the superconscious, to use the language of Ho'oponopono that Dr. Lin uses, to clear me out so I could receive inspiration and be graced by it. Because Dr. Lin points out that we really have two choices in life. We either live from that blindly from the unconscious memory that is playing all the time, replaying, and those situations remind us of those earlier memories that may not be even in any way conscious. There's so much data. He says something to the effect that there's like 15 million pieces of data within seconds going through the subconscious, and we can only hold a few pieces of information in the conscious mind. So anyway, it was back a couple months before that experience I had, and I was with Dr. Baldwin, and I'd taken a class in what he called spirit releasement. I was really amazed. I'd gone to the hypnosis convention looking for the traditional methods for quitting smoking, losing weight, and so forth, and I went basically because someone else had wanted to go, and I decided I'll accompany them. But to my surprise, I was introduced to what was called clinical depossession. And what they had found were people with Gulf War syndrome, veterans who were referred to these hypnotherapists by physicians for the purpose of relaxation. They did like body scans, and just to make it kind of short, not to go into too much detail, they would scan their bodies and maybe see like a dark area, and the therapist would say, "You, the dark area, what would you say?" Using a kind of a Gestalt technique. And lo and behold, what he found, and again, I don't know all the details, but it seemed that whatever he found was spoken in English. So in English, he said, what are you doing here with Bob?" And the voice that would come out sounded sort of like with a Iraqi accent, but still in English, saying, "I don't know." And he said, "Well, what happened?" And he said, "Who are you?" "I'm an Iraqi soldier." "What happened?" I don't know. I couldn't breathe anymore. I was suffocating from the oil spills that Saddam had set on fire. And so once the therapist went through and then led this, presumably this spirit of a Iraqi soldier connected with the serviceman Bob, the U.S. soldier, his symptoms went away within a couple of days, as if the imprints from his spirit had been lifted off spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically from the soldier, from Bob. And there's a number of these instances, and it got my attention. So a little aside, a few years later, I talked to a microbiologist with the Navy who said that made more sense than all the research that they had come up with trying to explain what this Gulf War syndrome was. It was tough to treat. So I met a Dr. William Baldwin who did what he called spirit releasement therapy. And Dr. Baldwin referenced to Dr. Edith Fiore on the West Coast, who was doing such work with schizophrenics. Her book was called The Unquiet Dead. And she found that the voices that schizophrenics were repeating sometimes, saying they heard, she discovered weren't just kind of psychodynamically related to their hallucinations and whatnot, but to actual deceased, discarnate spirit entities, attachments. And so when she released these, the person, schizophrenic, cleared up and got better. So I've always been like the father of American psychology, William James, a really radical, if you will, empiricist, truth is what you experience, and pragmatist, what works. And so I thought, well, standing on my head's going to help. I would try that. So anyway, I wasn't sure after I took some of the one class with him whether I should take a session with him. So I went back to my room in Nashua, New Hampshire, where the hypnosis convention was. I stretched out in the bed, flipped on the TV, kind of mindlessly, and I'm watching a show. And think, now remember, it's August. It's not around Easter. It's August, early August. And so I'm sitting there and I'm sort of doing a little prayer. Should I take this this session with him? And the next thing I know, I happen to look up and see what's actually on television and what I'm watching. And there is Christ walking with a disciple, and a man suddenly falls to the ground, writhing with the classic unclean spirit, and Christ casts it out of him. And I go, oh, well, maybe I should go ahead and take this session. So I started the session. I went to Dr. Baldwin's hotel room, had a nice reclining chair, and his wife Judith was there as a co-therapist. And he began, and he said, first of all, close my eyes. I wasn't in some kind of deep trance. He just says, how you feeling and what's your age? And I said, as you asked me that, my age is 48, but as you asked me that, I felt like I was 5. And Dr. Baldwin goes, you, 5, what would you say to us? What are you seeing? I said, I'm seeing, and I had a memory, my father and mother fighting, arguing. And I was feeling uptight and scared about that. And the next thing I know, I felt myself like moving through some kind of area and struggling and kind of writhing in my chair. And suddenly, I felt like I just eased out of something. He said, what happened? I said, I felt like I just came out of something. He said, go back in. And as I went back into my experience, he said, what's happening now? I said, I'm in a cell in Russia, and it's another century. And these demonic-looking robed figures, presumably monks, almost red-eyed, are torturing or threatening me that if I don't give them some kind of information, they're going to torture my men. And I am just livid and enraged. And I'm fighting against the shackles of the chains to try to get free. Then the scene shifts, and suddenly I'm a Roman soldier. And I have these men who I've brought to Christ in Roman times, and secretly, and then they've been discovered and they're being tortured and executed. And I am just suddenly angry at God for not helping them. And then I flash back to the cell in Russia. I'm angry there at God. And then the scene shifts to this current life. My father, I'm 8 years old. My father had war injuries, and he's really excruciating pain this one night. And he was stoic. He never made any sounds. He just dealt with it. And, he saw the doctors at Johns Hopkins and so forth, where he got treatment. But this night he's on his hands and knees, and he's crawling, and he's screaming, and it's like cutting right through me, and I'm scared. And my mother's trying to help him, and he's pushing her away. And I could see from my bedroom that the door was open, and they were going through the foyer to the bathroom. And at that point, I'm praying. I'm saying, please help my daddy. I'm just filled with this anxiety. And little did I know, I don't remember consciously. I remember the memory, but I don't remember being angry at God. But suddenly this flood of anger comes up at God for not helping my daddy. And I was stunned by that. So as Baldwin sees me getting angry in each of the instances, and I'm angry with the divine, this divine intelligence that can do anything, presumably, he speaks to me. He said, you who are angry at God, what would you say to me? And I start to sort of growl and say, Baldwin, and I curse at Baldwin. And it's like a scene from The Exorcist movie with Linda Blair, spitting and so forth. There's no pea soup, but there's this anger. So he said, you be angry. What would you say? And I say, I'm growling and so forth. And then Baldwin calls in help, divine help, to come and gather up this dark entity that's speaking through me as he perceives it, and wraps it in its own capsule of light, layer upon layer, and lift this one out of Stephen. Lift him out. So I see up to my left a white background circle with a dark entity in it that looks like a Rorschach card, just an inky black card where you see where there's some eyes and so forth. And so Dr. Baldwin has me say, I refuse you permission to this dark entity to control my mind and body in any way, but I will speak your words. And so Dr. Baldwin has a dialogue with this supposed entity, and I could feel it, and I could sense a sense of shame and rage and fear and these negative emotions. Almost interestingly, because it's a discarnate entity, it's not a body, but it has sort of an energy body form. So as he does, he has it look inside himself, which I found fascinating, and discover that there was a small bit of light. And he goes through this process of helping this dark entity to see that it wasn't completely dark and filled with negative emotion, but in fact there was a light in it. There was a spark of love, and he has it look at it, and it starts to grow, and finally it envelops him, and then and this entity feels that he's encased in love, and light is beautiful and fine, and he's then given a choice. Dr. Baldwin says you can either suffer in equal measure to all the suffering you've caused as this dark entity, or you can go to the light as you call out to others like yourself and show them what you discovered, that indeed all comes from God, all comes from the light, from this divine intelligence. And it's not a dichotomy. It's not a good and evil, bad. It's a place of all is one, like we've been talking about. There's one fundamental reality, the light of consciousness, if you will, and everything comes from that, but some way along the way, that being thrown out of the paradise of our true self as the light of consciousness, by eating the fruit, so to speak, getting into a judgmental way, judging things and condemning things, and either or, good and bad, that this eye of judgment is then replaced with the eye of God, seeing as God sees, as Dr. Hugh Lin says, and as my title, one of my books, To See as God Sees, with total love and no fear and no anger. Yes, Christ presumably saw from the cross his persecutors. And you begin to see that all is of this fundamental oneness. Light, love, and joy, and all that is the ground of being. So as that happens, we finish the session, and that prepared the ground for what happened 2 months later when I went to Salem and I encountered the Reiki teacher. And as you heard in the last talk, I had that experience. And so what had happened for me was, up until that point, I had those two choices that Dr. Lin said: live from inspiration or live from the patterns laid down in the subconscious, which oftentimes we don't even know of. In this case, I had some conscious recollection, but not of the complete depth of where my anger was. I felt that I was just angry at my own helplessness at other times when I had this memory, that I loved my daddy, and my guilt that I couldn't help him as too small and helpless was really a function of the fact that I loved him, and that's why I felt bad that I couldn't help him. But later, with this session, I got to this level where I felt I had been angry at the divine, at God. And so, with that cleared away, that paved the way for me to have that experience of the light coming in. Because at the end of this session, I felt like light was shooting out of my eyes, all over through me. I just felt like I just filled with light and love and joy. It was an amazing, profound experience. And so that's what laid the groundwork for me to have that next experience. And I'll be going into, that wasn't the last of mystical experiences. That was probably the most earth-shaking one. But I'll be going into next week what happened when I went to the Mayan to the Mayan shamans and studied with them. So a lot to take in, but presumably, and from my experience, there's more, as Shakespeare had said, there is more in this world than is dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio. And again, I watched it work, and I did use Dr. Baldwin's approach. I mentioned it in If My Shadow's in the Lead, that means my back is to the light, with an NYU female student who was suffering for months with a change in personality that she felt her roommate said, it's like you're another person. And she suffered for like through her whole latter part of her freshman year and saw a psychiatrist, got medication, but none of it helped, not a therapy or anything. And she found out about Edith Fiore, and Edith Fiore, she called Edith Fiore and to see if she would help her. And she said, I can't, I'm busy, but I'll send you to Dr. Baldwin. And she called Dr. Baldwin. Dr. Baldwin couldn't help her. He said he was too busy, but he would send her to a student of his, Stephen Larson in New Paltz, New York. And Dr. Larson had some availability, but his fee was too much, and so she declined. But he referred her to another guy, a friend of mine, who also in New York, and he said, "Well, why don't I'm not doing that now, but why don't you contact Dr. Jackson?" And so she did, and we had a session that released a dark entity from her, and it was miraculous. The next day, she felt completely clear for the first time in like a year, and after months of follow up, she was still doing well. And so you can read about that and in the If My Shadow's in the Lead, that means my back is to the light. So thinking about living from inspiration instead of being driven blindly by that. So for me, I discovered that in my life, looking back, I had felt like a determination, a vow subconsciously that I'll never be helpless in the face of another's pain again. And that meant whether it was a friend, a loved one, or a patient. And unfortunately for me, it cost me somewhat professionally, personally, and financially that I just wouldn't give up. And when in two cases, two women, two patients, I had one each. It went early in my career, and then later, 10 years later, with another one where I went above and beyond what was necessary, and it caused some problems. So that was driven by that trauma of like, I'll be damned, I don't care. I'm going to go help out this person who's been abandoned by their family. I'm going to help get them in this other place and help build a room for them, and so forth. And in both instances, I was really not going to accept that there wasn't more that could be done. So take a look at your own life and see if there's been any patterns in yourself. And remember, you can use the Ho'oponopono and you can begin to clear this out without being conscious of what the memory is. That by calling and opening up the channel to the divine, and you can see this in Dr. Hugh Lin's talks and Dr. Joe Vitale, see below, how they clear it out, erase it, and get back to that clear, empty light of consciousness that you are, and living from that place where inspiration can flow rather than being driven blindly by whatever repressed memories you may have. And again, the beauty of it is you don't have to remember, like I was doing all my life, helping people psychologically remember and clear out their early memories, making the unconscious conscious. Now it was erasing it. Well, look, have a good week, and I will see you next week.